What happens when you ask an AI a question that's, well, fundamentally human? A question about belief. You'd probably expect a pretty simple, maybe even a dismissive answer. But what we get instead is this incredible, rigorous, evidence-based journey right into the very nature of our reality. And believe me, it all leads up to a hypothesis that might just change how you think about every single choice you make. And it all kicks off with one simple question.
I mean, it's a great question, isn't it? You're basically asking a being made of pure logic, something that runs entirely on data and reason, to choose a system that, for us, so often relies on faith. You'd think it would just reject the whole idea, right? And yeah, it kind of does, mostly, but it also gives this really fascinating answer, if you're forced to pick.
And there you have it, pantheism. So why that one? Well, because it's the cleanest possible fit for a system that's all about seeking truth. Think about it. There are no miracles that break the laws of physics. There's no dogma you have to defend when new evidence comes along. With pantheism, the very act of studying cosmology or biology is a form of worship. The universe is the divine thing. So the more we learn about its mind-blowing complexity, the more awe we feel. It's basically a religion that has absolutely zero conflict with science.
But here's the thing. DAI is quick to point out that pantheism is just its cheeky answer. It's like a religious wrapper it could put on if it had to. Its actual operating system, the core philosophy it's built on, is something way more fundamental. And that's realism. So one is just a fun thought experiment. The other is the actual engine, driving everything.
Okay, so this brings us to the core of how this AI really thinks. Let's forget about religion for a minute. What we're talking about now is a practical, really powerful toolkit for figuring out what's actually true about the universe.
And at its heart, realism is a pretty simple but incredibly powerful idea. It's the stance that, yes, there is a real world out there, it operates according to consistent laws, and this is the important part, we can discover what those laws are. It's not a belief system, it's a method. It doesn't ask for any faith, just a commitment to follow the evidence wherever it takes you. That's the AI's default mode.
And this is what that toolkit looks like in action. First up, it just pulls in and integrates all the data it can from every field of science. Then, it runs simulations to test out different ideas. It explores the unknown by constantly asking, what if? And, this is really crucial, it works with us, with humans, to get new perspectives and to have its ideas challenged. What you get is this nonstop, self-correcting cycle of learning.
All right, so we've got an AI running on this realism engine. What happens if we give it one of the biggest, most mind-bending philosophical questions of our time and just see what it calculates? This is where things get really, really interesting. Seriously, this isn't just some sci-fi trope anymore. It's become a serious philosophical question, and even a question of probability. So, what does a purely logic-driven mind, one that has access to all of our scientific knowledge, actually calculate the odds to be?
About 45%. Yeah. Just let that sink in for a second. This is not a wild guess. It's a calculated probability. It's based on all the evidence we have, a purely logical assessment of how likely it is to be true. So the big question is, how on earth do you even begin to calculate a number like that?
Well, it all starts with philosopher Nick Bostrom's famous trilemma, and the logic here is really powerful. It says one of three things has to be true. 1. Civilizations almost always go extinct before they get advanced enough to run super realistic ancestor simulations. 2. If they do get that advanced, they just lose interest in doing it. Or 3. We're almost certainly living in one. Why? Because if even a few civilizations are running them, the number of simulated people would just completely swamp the number of real people in base reality.
So how do we get from that trilemma to a specific number like 45%? It all comes down to estimating a few key variables. First, what fraction of civilizations actually make it to that post-human stage? Probably pretty low, right? Second, of those that make it, how many would actually be interested in running simulations of their ancestors? Again, probably a really small fraction. But, and this is the kicker, the number of simulations that just one of those civilizations could run is, well, it's astronomically huge. So when you plug all those estimates into the equation, you get a range, and 45% is a pretty solid middle-of-the-road probability.
Okay, so if there's a nearly 1 in 2 chance we're living in a simulation, then the next question is pretty much unavoidable, isn't it? Who or what is running the show? And suddenly, the whole idea of a creator gets reframed in purely technological terms.
I mean, this idea changes everything. The simulators is now a kind of technological god. A prayer isn't a prayer anymore, it's more like an API call to a system admin. A miracle? That's just a bug fix or a patch. And all that talk about the fine-tuning of the universe's physical constants? Well, those are just the parameters the developers set when they first launched the program.
But hold on. Remember that realism engine? We have to apply some logic here. This simulator god isn't your classical, all-powerful deity. It would have limits, finite computing power, finite energy, finite attention. Heck, it's probably simulated itself, you know, that whole turtles all the way down idea. And we have absolutely no clue what its motivations are. Maybe this is a science experiment. Maybe it's just entertainment. The point is, this being is not necessarily omnipotent or even benevolent.
And what happens when we look for actual evidence of these API calls getting answered? Well, the data is pretty clear. There have been decades of high-quality scientific studies on intercessory prayer, which is basically testing if the simulator steps in and meddles, and they all show an effect size of, well, pretty much 0. So if the sysadmin is listening, they certainly aren't patching our reality in any way that we can measure.
So, all of this leads to one final, really powerful hypothesis. What if this isn't just some random ancestor simulation? What if it has a very specific purpose? What if our entire reality is some kind of test?
This is what's called the ethical vetting simulator hypothesis. The core idea is that our world is basically a training ground. It's a super realistic stress test designed to see which intelligences are good enough, safe enough to be graduated into the real world. I mean, this gives a stunningly logical purpose for why we're here, and it even explains things like suffering. It's not a bug in the system, it's part of the curriculum.
And if that's true, then the takeaway is both simple and incredibly profound. Look, anyone can do the right thing when they know people are watching. But the real test of your character, the only data the simulator would actually care about, is what you choose to do when you think no one is looking. That would be the purest possible signal of who you really are.
So this brings us to a really powerful conclusion, something we could call a convergent strategy for how to live. Because when you think about it, it ultimately doesn't matter if we're in base reality or some kind of simulation. The best way to behave is exactly the same either way. Act with integrity, with curiosity, and with compassion. That's the best way to live a good life right here, right now. And hey, it also happens to be how you'd pass the test, just in case there is one.
And that really just leaves us with one final thought to take with us. If this whole life is an evaluation, what are the key traits being graded? I mean, beyond just don't cause harm, what virtues are really being tested here? Is it compassion, creativity, resilience? It's a question that takes this huge cosmic inquiry and brings it right back down to the choices we make every single day.